She had never imagined that the people she raised with love could look at her one day and see only a burden. It happened quietly, like a shadow slipping across a familiar room. The laughter fading, the warmth gone. And then came the words that cracked something inside her forever. "You're just an extra mouth, Mom. We can't afford to keep you here." The voice didn't belong to a stranger. It was her daughter's. The girl she'd once rocked to sleep during thunderstorms. The girl whose college tuition she'd worked double shifts to pay for. Grace had always believed family was a shelter. But on that rainy afternoon, standing in her daughter's hallway with her suitcase and a heart full of disbelief, she realized shelters could turn into storms too. Welcome to True Voice. If you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Grace Lane left her daughter's house that day with nothing but a folded umbrella, a worn-out handbag, and the echo of betrayal following her like a second shadow. The sky wept for her, though she couldn't. She had spent a lifetime being soft, and it had cost her everything. But life, she thought, has a strange way of teaching lessons, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a key. For weeks, Grace slept in a friend's spare room, trying to make sense of it all. Every cup of tea tasted of disappointment. Every dawn felt like an accusation. She wasn't angry, not yet, just tired. Tired of giving until she was empty. Then, one afternoon, as she walked past the old apartment block where she'd once lived with her late husband, she saw a for sale sign. The very building her daughter now rented an apartment in. The same one she'd been thrown out of. Her steps slowed. Her pulse quickened. Fate, it seemed, was offering her something. Not revenge, not yet, but choice. Grace had savings, quiet little pockets of money tucked away over the years. The emergency fund her husband had started before he died. And now, that fund felt like a whisper from him. "You still have power, Grace." Within a week, she sat across from a real estate agent. Her voice trembled as she signed the papers, but not from fear. From awakening. The building was hers. She didn't tell her daughter. She didn't tell anyone. She simply let the world keep spinning while she stood quietly in the center of it, holding a secret that shimmered with poetic justice. Days turned into weeks. Rent notices were sent out to every tenant, her daughter included. When the new ownership letter arrived, addressed from Lane Holdings, her daughter barely noticed. Grace watched from a distance as her daughter complained about the rising rent, unaware that the hand raising it was her mother's. Then came the moment of reckoning. Her daughter and son-in-law stormed into the property office one morning, angry and loud. Grace sat behind the frosted glass wall, listening to every word. "It's ridiculous," her daughter shouted. "The rent's tripled. We can't afford this." Her son-in-law slammed his hand on the desk. "We'll find whoever this new owner is. They can't treat us like this." Grace stepped out from behind the glass. The air fell silent. Her daughter's face drained of color. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Grace's voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "I own the building now." The silence that followed could have filled oceans. Her daughter blinked as if trying to rewrite reality, but the truth stood solid before her. Soft, composed, unshakable. Grace didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply handed her daughter a new lease agreement and said, "You said there wasn't room for me before. But there's always room in a story for a change of heart." The son-in-law stared, speechless. Grace turned to leave, but her daughter's voice trembled behind her. "Mom, please." She paused at the doorway. "This isn't revenge," she said softly. "It's a reminder that the people you cast aside can still rise without bitterness." Grace walked out of that office lighter than she'd felt in years. Not because she'd hurt them, but because she'd healed herself. Yet peace, like truth, is never simple. That evening, as she returned home, she found a letter slid under her door. No address, no signature, just her name written in her daughter's handwriting. Inside were 3 words. "We need to talk." Grace's heart ached. Forgiveness was a bridge, she knew, but some bridges were burned beyond recognition. Still, she placed the letter on her table and stared out at the quiet street, torn between what was just and what was kind. The night deepened, and with it, a question she couldn't silence. Was this truly over? Or had the real reckoning just begun? Because sometimes life's cruelest lessons come not when you lose everything, but when you finally get the chance to give it all back. Grace stared at the letter long after the night had swallowed the last traces of daylight. "We need to talk." 3 words that carried the weight of years, of love, betrayal, and unfinished apologies. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers, though her hands were steady. The truth was, she didn't know whether she wanted to hear her daughter's voice again. The next morning, a knock echoed through her small apartment. When she opened the door, Isabella stood there. The same poise, the same beauty Grace had once envied and adored. But now, her daughter's face was pale, her confidence fractured. "Mom," she began softly, her voice breaking. "Can I come in?" Grace hesitated. Then she stepped aside. The silence between them was thick, almost tangible. Grace made tea, the same way she always had when Isabella was little. 1 spoon of sugar, a dash of milk, stirred counterclockwise. Some habits outlive even heartbreak. "I didn't know it was you," Isabella said finally. "When we got the notice, I thought it was some greedy landlord." Grace's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "Sometimes the world has a funny way of giving us mirrors." Isabella flinched. "I didn't mean what I said, Mom. That day, things were hard. Mark lost his job and I was scared. We both were. I didn't mean to throw you out." Grace said nothing. The sound of the spoon against the porcelain cup filled the room like a ticking clock. "You told me I was an extra mouth," Grace whispered at last. You made me feel like I didn't deserve a place in my own child's life. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. Grace looked up, her gaze steady but soft. You meant every word in that moment. That's the part that hurt. Silence again. The kind that exposes truth more than words ever could. Isabella reached for her mother's hand, but Grace pulled away, not in anger but in quiet pain. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible in your own story? She asked. To raise a daughter so she can have a life better than yours, and then watch her close the door on you. Isabella sobbed quietly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, Mom, don't make me move. Mark's trying to find work. We can't afford the rent increase. Grace's heart twisted. For a brief moment, she saw not the woman who had cast her out, but the frightened girl she once tucked in at night. Her mother's instinct rose to the surface, but so did the memory of that rainy afternoon, the sting of rejection, the way the door had shut behind her without a second glance. She exhaled slowly. You'll stay, she said finally. Isabella's eyes widened with relief until Grace added, but you'll pay what everyone else does. Fair and equal. I'm not your enemy, Isabella, but I won't be your doormat again. Her daughter nodded, ashamed but grateful. Days passed. The tension eased, but unease lingered, like smoke after a fire. Grace visited the property more often now, overseeing maintenance, managing tenants, rebuilding a sense of control she hadn't felt in years. Then one afternoon, as she reviewed paperwork in the office, she noticed a file missing. The new tenant list for Unit 4B. Isabella's unit. The rent payments hadn't been coming in. Confused, she checked the system. The last 3 months were marked paid, but the receipts didn't match any bank record. Grace's heart sank. Someone had been falsifying records. That evening, she went to her daughter's apartment. The lights were dim. Through the window she saw Mark, Isabella's husband, speaking in hushed tones to another woman on the phone. His hand brushed against her photo frame, turning it face down. Grace stepped back before he saw her, her pulse racing. The betrayal wasn't over, it had just changed shape. By the next morning she'd gathered the documents, every receipt, every record that told a story of lies layered under her roof. When she called Isabella to the office, she could barely steady her voice. Do you know what your husband's been doing? She asked quietly. Isabella blinked. What are you talking about? Grace slid the files across the desk. Falsified payments. Rent stolen. Under your name. Isabella stared at the papers as if they were poison. Her face went pale. Mark, he said he was taking care of it. I didn't know. Grace stood slowly. You didn't know, she repeated. That's what I told myself about you once. I didn't know my daughter could throw me out. I didn't know she could forget me so easily. Tears fell down Isabella's cheeks. Please, Mom, let me fix this. Grace turned away, her voice trembling with strength she didn't feel. No, Isabella. This time I'll fix it. As she walked out of the office, the sky darkened, the same way it had the day she was thrown out. Only now she wasn't broken. She was in control. But somewhere deep inside, Grace knew this was far from over. Mark's deceit ran deeper than missing rent. And the look on Isabella's face, the mix of guilt and terror, told her something worse was still hiding in the shadows. Grace had taken back her power. But soon, she'd learn that revenge has a way of uncovering more than you bargained for. The rain came early that morning, tapping softly against Grace's window, rhythmic, relentless, almost like memory itself refusing to fade. She sat by the window with her coffee untouched, her mind replaying every detail from the day before. The forged payments, Isabella's tears, the truth she could no longer unsee. She had thought buying the building would give her peace, justice, maybe even closure. But peace has a way of slipping through trembling hands when the people you love keep giving you new reasons to break. Grace decided she needed proof. Not just suspicion. She spent the afternoon at the property office, her reading glasses perched low on her nose as she pored over old invoices and maintenance logs. Each page told a story. Each signature whispered deceit. And then she found it, a check made out to M. Lane, her son-in-law. The payments hadn't disappeared. They'd been rerouted to him. By evening, Grace drove back to the building, parking a few blocks away. The light in Isabella's window flickered faintly. She waited until Mark left, a dark silhouette moving quickly toward a car parked near the alley. Grace followed from a distance. Her heart pounded like it hadn't in years. The car stopped outside a restaurant, small, dimly lit, the kind where secrets felt safe. Grace watched through the rain-blurred glass as Mark sat across from a woman in a red coat, young, smiling. She leaned in close, touching his hand. Grace's chest tightened. The scene was achingly familiar, not because of Mark, but because of what it reminded her of, her own husband's betrayal years ago. History repeating itself, but this time, it was her daughter's marriage unraveling in the same cruel rhythm. She left before the tears could fall. The next morning, Isabella knocked on her door again. Her face was drawn, sleepless. Mark's gone, she said quietly. He packed a bag and disappeared. I don't know what to do. Grace hesitated, studying her. For once, the pride was gone. Only fear remained. Sit down, Grace said softly. Isabella obeyed, folding into herself like a child. You were right, she whispered. About the money. About everything. Grace didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in being right, not when the cost was her daughter's pain. He's been stealing from me, Bella, she said gently. From this building. From you. I know, Isabella whispered. He said he'd pay it back once he got the new job. But there was no job, was there? Grace shook her head. No, there wasn't. For a long while neither spoke. The air between them was heavy, full of the ghosts of things they never said. Then Isabella asked, barely audible, "Do you think people like us ever stop paying for the mistakes we make?" Grace reached across the table, her hand resting over her daughter's. "We don't stop paying," she said quietly. "We just learn to live with the debt." That night, Grace returned to the building alone. She needed space to think, to feel, to breathe. But when she entered the hallway, something caught her eye. The door to the basement, usually locked, was open. She descended the creaking stairs slowly. The air was cool, musty, heavy with dust. At the far end of the basement, the light flickered weakly, and there, beside a stack of old boxes, sat a briefcase. Her pulse quickened. Inside the case were more documents. Leases, bank transfers, letters addressed to tenants. But one envelope stopped her cold. It was marked for Isabella. "Do not open." Grace turned it over in her hands, the handwriting unmistakable. It wasn't Mark's. It was her late husband's. Her breath caught. She sat down on the cold cement floor, the letter trembling in her fingers as she opened it. "If you're reading this, Bella, it means I couldn't tell you the truth while I was still here." Her husband's voice seemed to echo through the basement. The letter spoke of debts, not money but promises. A woman named Evelyn, a child born out of wedlock. And then, at the bottom, one line that shattered the stillness around her. "The house you live in was never meant to be yours. It was hers." Grace's heartbeat roared in her ears. Evelyn. The name haunted her. A name from decades past. A woman she'd once called her closest friend. She folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling. The floorboards creaked above. Someone was in the house. Grace rose slowly, tucking the letter into her coat pocket. As she reached the top of the stairs, a shadow crossed the hallway. It wasn't Isabella. It wasn't Mark. The door slammed. The lights went out. And Grace realized the truth she'd uncovered wasn't the only secret buried inside that building. There was someone else who didn't want the past brought to light. Grace froze in the dark, her breath shallow, her mind racing. The air in the building had changed, colder now, charged with something she couldn't name. She reached for her phone, but it slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering against the floor. A faint voice drifted from the hallway. "You shouldn't have come here tonight." Grace's blood ran cold. A shadow stepped forward, the woman in the red coat, the same one from the restaurant. Up close, her face was younger than Grace expected, but her eyes carried the weary knowing of someone who had lived through too many lies. "You shouldn't have opened that letter," the woman said softly. Grace steadied herself. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated, her expression shifting between anger and sorrow. "Evelyn," she whispered. The name hit Grace like a stone. Evelyn, the name in her husband's letter. The ghost from her past, standing in flesh and blood. Grace took a step back, the letter still in her coat pocket. "That's not possible," she said. "You're gone," Evelyn finished. "I was, until I saw what your daughter's husband was doing to this place. I came to warn you." Grace studied her, the way her hands trembled, the way she avoided her eyes. "You knew my husband," Grace said quietly. "Didn't you?" Evelyn nodded. "We both did. But not in the way you think." She turned away, pacing the narrow hallway. "When he found out I was pregnant, he panicked, said it would destroy everything. So he made a deal, money in exchange for silence. He thought he was protecting you. But secrets don't protect, Grace. They rot." Grace's knees weakened, but she didn't fall. "The letter. It said my daughter's home belonged to you." Evelyn looked up. "It does. He bought that house in my name before you ever knew. When he passed, your lawyer transferred it to Isabella, probably thinking it was part of his estate. But legally, it's mine." The silence between them felt endless. Grace wanted to scream, to weep, to curse a man long buried. But all she could do was breathe through the ache in her chest. "You're telling me," Grace whispered, "that everything I built, every sacrifice I made, was built on a lie?" Evelyn's gaze softened. "No, what you built was real, Grace. What he hid was the lie." The sound of footsteps echoed again, this time heavier, hurried. Both women turned. A beam of light cut through the darkness as the basement door creaked open again. Isabella stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" Grace's mouth opened, but no words came. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You must be Isabella." Isabella's gaze darted between them. "Who is she?" Grace tried to find the right words. She's someone your father knew." But Isabella's expression changed, not in shock, but in recognition. "I know who she is." The room seemed to tilt. Grace looked at her daughter. "You know her?" Isabella nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "I met her 2 months ago. Mark introduced us." Grace felt the air leave her lungs. "Mark." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low. "He's been using both of you. Your husband wasn't the only one keeping secrets." Isabella's lips trembled. "He told me she was a distant relative, that she could help us sort the property issues after you bought the building. I didn't know." Grace's heartbeat thundered. "He knew about the letter," she whispered. "He must have." Evelyn nodded grimly. "He's been searching for it. Your husband left a copy of the deed hidden somewhere in this house, the one that proves ownership. Whoever finds it controls the entire property." The lights flickered again, and from somewhere above, a door slammed shut. Mark's voice echoed faintly through the stairwell. "You shouldn't have come back here, Grace." Isabella gasped, backing away as the footsteps grew louder. Evelyn's face hardened. "He won't stop," she said. "Not until he has everything." Grace straightened, her eyes no longer afraid. "Then he's about to learn who this building really belongs to." The three women stood in the dim basement, the mother, the daughter, and the ghost of the past, bound by betrayal, blood, and truth finally unearthed. Above them, the sound of breaking glass shattered the stillness. And when they looked up, the basement ceiling trembled, dust falling like ash, as Mark's voice roared from above. "It's over, Grace." But Grace only whispered, steady and cold. "No, Mark. It's just beginning." The floorboards groaned above them as Mark's footsteps paced the living room. Every creak felt like a countdown, every breath like a test of will. Grace stood still, her heartbeat calm now, her grief hardened into clarity. She had spent too many years swallowed by guilt. This time she wouldn't run. Evelyn's hand brushed her arm gently. "He's dangerous when he feels cornered." Grace met her eyes. "So was I once. When I had nothing left to lose." The basement door slammed open. Mark descended the steps slowly, his shirt disheveled, eyes sharp and burning with panic. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. "You had no right." Grace cut him off, her tone soft but unyielding. "I have every right. This building was mine before you ever stepped inside it." Mark's eyes darted to Evelyn, then back to Grace. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Oh, I do," Grace said. "I understand betrayal. I understand greed. I understand what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness." He scoffed, but his voice trembled. "You're not going to ruin everything I've built." Grace took a step closer. "Everything you've built? You mean the lies, the stolen money, the tenants you overcharged, or the fact that you let my daughter believe I was the burden while you were draining her dry?" Mark's jaw tightened. Isabella flinched behind her mother, tears glistening under the dim basement light. "Mom, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. But Grace didn't look back. Her eyes stayed locked on him. Evelyn moved closer to the old desk in the corner, her fingers running along the edge. "He's hiding something," she murmured. "Look." Grace turned. Beneath the desk, a faint outline of a loose panel caught her eye. She knelt, pulled it back, and there it was, an envelope sealed with wax, aged and yellowed. Mark lunged forward, but Grace stood first, holding it just out of reach. "Is this what you were so desperate to find?" His voice broke. "Give it to me, Grace." Her hand trembled, but her gaze didn't. "Tell me what's in it." He exhaled shakily. "Your husband, he left the deed, but not to you. It's a trust, a hidden account tied to this property. Your daughter's name is on it." Isabella stepped forward, her face pale. "Mine." Mark nodded. "And mine." The room went silent. Grace's eyes widened. "He made you joint owners." Mark's tone turned cold. "He wanted to protect his legacy, to make sure someone strong could manage it. I was the one handling the finances. I earned this." Grace's voice broke through the tension. "You earned it by breaking this family apart." Mark sneered. "Your family was already broken. I just took what no one else could handle." And then, from above, a sudden sound cut him off. The sharp slam of a front door. All eyes turned upward. Evelyn's whisper came like wind through the silence. "We're not alone." Mark stiffened. Grace reached for the envelope again, but before she could open it, a small metallic glint caught her eye, a camera light blinking red on a nearby shelf. Her heart pounded. The realization struck her instantly. The basement had been under surveillance. Evelyn's face went pale. "He's been recording us." Mark's calm mask cracked. "You don't know what you've done." Grace stepped closer, her voice trembling with quiet fury. "Oh, but I do. You see, Mark, you just confessed everything. And that little red light." She pointed at the camera. "That's my building's security system." For a moment no one moved. Then, as if all the air had been sucked from the room, Mark's shoulders dropped. The fight drained from his face. Grace turned to her daughter. "You have a choice now, Isabella. Keep protecting the man who used your father's death to build his fortune, or stand beside the mother you threw away." Isabella looked between them, the man she thought she loved, the mother she had betrayed, her lips trembling. I don't know what's true anymore." Evelyn's voice softened. "Then maybe it's time you see for yourself." She pressed a button on the camera and the playback began. The footage flickered. Mark meeting with lawyers, whispering to tenants, transferring money, signing papers with Isabella's name forged underneath. Grace watched, silent, tears sliding down her face. Not from pain, but from the vindication of truth finally breaking free. Mark lunged forward, smashing the desk, but Grace didn't flinch. She simply whispered, "It's over." But before anyone could speak again, the camera feed shifted to a date months before. A video Grace had never seen. Her husband, live, sitting in the same basement. And his words filled the room like thunder. "If you're watching this, it means my secret is out. But the truth isn't what you think, Grace. It was never just about the house." Grace froze. Evelyn gasped. And Mark, for the first time, looked truly afraid. The old footage crackled with static, the camera's timestamp flickering faintly in the corner. 5 years before her husband's death. Grace's heart pounded as his voice filled the basement, quiet but deliberate, as if he knew this moment would one day come. Grace, he said, his tone weary but resolute, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone. But you deserve to know the truth before anyone else rewrites it. The room fell utterly silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent bulb above seemed to fade. He looked older in the video. Tired eyes, unshaven face, hands fidgeting nervously. I made mistakes. Terrible ones. I thought I was protecting our family, but I was only protecting my shame. His voice broke slightly, and for the first time in years, Grace saw him not as the man who abandoned her with debt, but as someone haunted by his own regret. He glanced off camera. Evelyn will know what I mean. Evelyn's eyes filled instantly. He recorded this for both of us. Grace stood frozen. Her breath felt shallow, her pulse a thunder in her ears. I couldn't tell you, her husband continued. But the house, the building, everything you think you own isn't just property. It's collateral. I took money from people I shouldn't have, to save the company when it failed. Evelyn tried to warn me. And Mark. Grace's head snapped toward Mark, whose face had gone pale. He wasn't just your daughter's husband, her husband said. He was my partner before he married into the family. He knew about the debt. He knew where the real deed was hidden. And when I tried to fix things, he threatened to expose me. So I buried the proof. In plain sight. The footage flickered again, cutting out briefly before his voice returned. Quieter now, almost trembling. If Grace finds this, if she ever learns what I did, tell her I never meant to leave her with nothing. The account tied to this property isn't about money. It's about ownership, hers. Because she was the only one who ever built anything worth saving. The screen went black. No one spoke. The weight of the truth pressed down like the cold air in that basement. Evelyn wiped her eyes, her expression unreadable. Isabella's hands trembled as she turned toward Mark. You knew. Mark tried to speak, but his voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought the money would. Stop, Grace whispered. The word cut sharper than any shout. He fell silent. Grace took a step forward. You took my daughter's trust. You took my husband's shame. And you turned it into profit. Mark's face hardened. Don't pretend you were innocent. He lied to you too. I know, she said softly. But he tried to make it right. You didn't. Isabella's tears fell freely now. You used me, Mark. You used all of us. He stepped back, cornered now between guilt and pride. You don't understand. I was next in line to lose everything. The company failed, the house was gone. I was just trying to survive. Grace looked at him, not with anger but pity. You survived by taking from the only people who would have helped you. Evelyn moved closer, pulling the old envelope from Grace's hand. She opened it carefully, and inside, among the faded papers, was a single key. Small brass unmarked. What does it open? Isabella asked. Evelyn turned it over in her hand. I don't know. But your father said he buried the proof in plain sight. Grace's eyes widened. Slowly, she looked around the basement. At the shelves, the boxes, the cracks in the wall. And then she saw it. A small metal box bolted beneath the old stairwell. She crouched down, her hands trembling as she fit the key into the lock. The click echoed like a heartbeat. Inside the box was a thin folder, sealed with red tape. On the front, written in her husband's handwriting, were the words, "The true owner." Grace opened it. Inside, legal documents, dated and notarized, proving full ownership of the building, in her name. Not Isabella's. Not Mark's. Her breath caught in her throat. Evelyn smiled softly through tears. He did try to fix it, she whispered. Mark's face twisted with disbelief. That's not possible. Grace turned to him, her voice steady, almost gentle. It's over, Mark. You've lost. He shook his head, fury breaking through. You can't do this. I built everything here. She held his gaze. Then you'll watch me take it back. He lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but Evelyn stepped between them, her voice sharp as glass. Don't. For a moment, everything froze. Mark's anger, Isabella's tears, Grace's steady breath. Then he dropped his hand and backed away, realizing the fight was done. Grace gathered the folder close to her chest, her voice trembling as she spoke. For years, I thought losing my home was my punishment. But now I see it was my lesson. You don't lose what's yours. You just forget to claim it. Isabella stepped forward, eyes filled with guilt and wonder. Mom, I'm so sorry. Grace turned, the faintest smile breaking through her tears. Then start by learning what home really means. But before any of them could move, the power flickered again. The screen behind them came alive. One final video playing automatically. It was their lawyer, recent, dated only a week ago. And his words made Grace's blood run cold. If you're watching this, he said, then Mark has already made his move. The deed may name Grace Lane as the owner, but the property has been sold. Yesterday. The folder slipped from Grace's hands, papers scattering across the floor. Evelyn's eyes widened. Isabella gasped. Mark's smile returned, slow and poisonous. You were too late, Grace. Grace stood frozen, the lawyer's voice echoing through the cold basement. The property has been sold. Yesterday. Her heart thudded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Evelyn steadied her arm, whispering, "Grace, breathe." But Grace's eyes were locked on Mark. His smirk was faint, cruel, the kind of expression that comes from someone who's sure he's won. "You should have moved faster," he said quietly. "Paper doesn't stop power." Grace knelt, collecting the scattered pages, her fingers trembling but her face strangely calm. "You're right," she murmured. "Paper doesn't stop power. But truth does." Mark frowned, thrown by the quiet strength in her tone. Grace turned to Isabella, her voice soft but unwavering. "You once told me I was just an extra mouth to feed, that I didn't understand how business worked. But look around you, this building, this family, everything that fell apart. It wasn't because of me. It was because you forgot that hearts build homes, not contracts." Isabella's lips quivered. "Mom." Evelyn stepped closer, holding out her phone. "Grace, there's something you should see." On the screen, the lawyer's email from that morning. Attached. A transfer confirmation. The sale hadn't closed yet. The buyer's funds were pending, flagged by the bank due to a legal ownership dispute. Grace exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing just slightly. He tried to sell what he didn't own. Mark's confidence faltered. That's not possible. But it was. Because the recorded deed, filed under her husband's signature, was valid. And Evelyn, sharp, quiet Evelyn, had already forwarded it to the city registrar hours ago. Mark stepped back, panic beginning to ripple through his composure. "You can't prove that." Evelyn's calm voice cut through the air. "Already did." The silence that followed was almost sacred. Grace straightened, the soft light from the window haloing her silver hair. "Mark, you sold the building out of greed. I bought it back out of peace." She held up the final page, signed and stamped. "This property is mine. Lawfully, finally, and permanently." Isabella's tears spilled freely now, a quiet, shaking confession escaping her lips. "Mom, I was wrong. About you, about everything." Grace stepped close enough to touch her daughter's cheek, but didn't. She simply smiled, sad, knowing, forgiving in a way that words couldn't express. "No, sweetheart. You were just lost. Like I was." Outside, the light had shifted, warm gold melting into evening amber. As they walked up from the basement, Grace paused by the doorway, taking one last look back at the place that had witnessed every wound and every truth. Mark sat slumped against the wall, head bowed, the weight of his downfall heavy and silent. "Grace," he said softly, almost broken. "What will you do now?" She looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the open door, the sunlight painting her face in gold. "I'll raise the rent," she said, her voice calm, almost poetic, "and rebuild my peace on the ruins you left behind." Days later, a new sign gleamed outside the building. Lane Properties, in elegant gold lettering. Rent notices went out that morning, each one tripled, each one legal. And while the tenants whispered about the new owner, Grace sat in her modest kitchen, a cup of tea in hand, the same sunlight warming her as the day she'd been thrown out. Only this time, the warmth belonged to her. She looked out the window and smiled faintly. Not out of triumph, but release. She hadn't just bought back a building. She'd reclaimed her dignity, her peace, her story. And sometimes that's the truest form of revenge. Not destruction, but quiet justice. Grace whispered to herself. "You can lose everything and still come home." She took another sip of tea, the city outside humming softly in the distance. Calm, steady, hers. Because she'd finally learned. You can't control how people betray you, but you can control what you build after they do. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to comment below.